and when I meet with mums and dads, farmers at their dining table, the discussion I'm going to take you through is going to be pretty much identical to that. And so it's a set routine in terms of the order in which we go through things. I do, when I'm sitting at the dining table, I do it off my laptop, and I would show documents by just turning my laptop around and putting it towards the farmer and saying, this is what I'm talking about, or this is the document. And a lot of the stuff we make available to the farmers at that time. The only thing I'm not able to do for you this evening is clearly to do the farm walk. So our farm visits are typically broken into two parts. The dining table discussion, talking through your legal responsibilities and what you need to know, and then doing a walk around of the sheds, and that's the second part of the visit. And typically the dining table discussion is in the order of about 2 hours. And that's what we're going to go through this evening. To the project as a whole, I'm going to start sharing my screen now, and so I will share my screen at various times throughout the presentation, but I'll try not to overdo it. And I'm just going to share the main resource we use. The Making Our Farm Safer project has been going since October 2020, when I started the VFF, a funded project by the Victorian government. And our service is available to all Victorian farmers free of charge. Online with me this evening is our project manager, Megan Cassidy, and also our media comms officer, Kayla, and they're assisting me with delivering this presentation this evening. I strongly point you towards the Making Our Farm Safer website, where at various stages where I point you to resources. That's where you will find a lot of those resources on that website. And also to the Making Our Farm Safer newsletter, and of which there have been 36 editions. And I strongly encourage farmers to go back and read past editions. Our mission with the project as a whole has been to educate and inform and guide the industry, and to tell farmers things they don't know, to make them aware of what their legal responsibilities are, and also how to practically meet those responsibilities. But also a big part of our project has been to engage with and influence the safety culture of the industry. And so if you haven't seen any of those newsletters, I strongly encourage you to have a read of them, and backtrack and read a few of the past editions. With the project, we've had myself and another safety advisor. Between the two of us, we've delivered around 330 farm visits over the last 3 years. The effort tonight is with a view to trying to get as many farmers as we can reach to take up essentially a consultancy or a farm visit, and to try and share as much knowledge and information as we can with as many as we can in the time that's permissible with the project. We'll get into the detail. The primary resource that I hand over to farmers and transfer across on our USB stick when we meet with them at the dining table is this resource, which we call our Consultancy Handbook. And it is we provide it in both the PDF and Word version, and it is written in exactly the same order in which I would talk through the detail with the farmer. And so that resource will be available for download, and Kayla's just put up the link on the chat there that you can click through and download that resource. So you can bookmark that or copy that, and then download that later on. You can download it sooner if you wish, but what I find with meeting with farmers at the dining table is it's best they hear the conversation and take in all the detail, and then refer back to that resource later on to keep the knowledge up and know the journey as they go through implementing the OH&S. Now, with OH&S, when we talk about an OH&S Act and regulations, we're talking about a fair amount of legal territory, a fair bit of responsibility. And you're talking about multiple chapters of the regulations, multiple things to do. And you can't do those things overnight. And no business can become compliant overnight in terms of meeting their legal responsibilities in full. The way we describe OH&S is that it is a journey. It's something where you put a stake in the ground and you have a crack at doing things bit by bit over time. One of the resources we make available for farmers when we do our farm safety visits is a plan. a hypothetical 6-month plan that a business can take and put on their letterhead or put on their company name there, whereas company XYZ at the screen there, and then start to have a crack at things over time, bit by bit, month by month by month. And the plan we have here is a sample 6-month plan. Now, we know fully well in our industry, for example, with grain farmers and livestock farmers, you'll have harvest and you'll have shearing seasons, and even hort farmers with picking and everything, yeah, it'd be ideal to say, well, we can knock this over 6 months. And I'd say to a farmer, don't stress. If it takes you 12 months, well, so be it. But the key is to have something that's going to guide you through your journey, something that's going to actually give you a sense of direction and a sense of what you need to do. Now, I'm going to the detail in the plan. I'm going to park that plan there because when I sum things up and pretty much paint the picture of how WorkSafe would look at things, and if you had an inspector come in, or come back to saying the best way to manage safety in a business is with a plan. The plan, as I said, is actually directly aligned with the handbook. So in terms of the order in which we sequence things in there, it mirrors pretty much what you see in the handbook. So we start as if I was at the dining table in terms of talking to the detail with the farmer. And the first question I'd ask any business owner would be, do they have an OH&S policy in their business? And frequently the answer to that question is no. And I already know that from vast experience in dealing with small business and even knowing this question, but again, consistent with the idea that we're telling them stuff they don't know. Well, I'd say, well, yeah, here you go. Here's one we prepared earlier. Here's your OH&S policy. And what we're looking at there, if you see that document on your screen, is a very powerful motherhood statement for an employer that essentially says we are serious about safety. Now, I know fully well from experience dealing with lots of small business over years that the vast majority of small business and farmers are serious about safety. They are safety conscious. They do believe they provide a safe workplace, and they believe it in their hearts and minds. But unfortunately, often they have no evidence to show for that. They have nothing that actually they can fall back on that can actually clearly demonstrate or back up or support that belief that they are serious about safety. Now, with the OH&S policy, I referred to it earlier as a powerful motherhood statement, and that's effectively what it is. It puts it out there for all and sundry. Now, in our industry, there's some commodity groups where there are industry audits. For example, with hort farmers, they have the fresh care audits. You've got some industry standards groups where they'll have some audit criteria for business to be able to be eligible for various programs. And often one of the first questions that comes up during the audit criteria is, do they have an OH&S policy? And when I raise that with a lot of farmers, they think, oh, it's this OH&S folder, or it's this OH&S platform, or it's this OH&S resource. And I explain to them, no, it's just this. It's just a single page or 2-page document that the audit is looking for that shows clear commitment and intent. And in terms of auditing criteria, this stuff is perceived as good corporate citizen sort of stuff. And in corporate type environments and in offices in the city or construction sites, this stuff might often find its way up on the wall inside a frame. I'm not suggesting farmers they necessarily go and whack their OH&S policy up in a frame on the wall, but if you may be a larger business, you might have it somewhere on display. But now with WorkSafe, it's not a legal requirement as such. It's not that they're looking for it necessarily, but it puts a smile on their face when they see a business that has an OH&S policy. But what I explained then, it's not about WorkSafe. It's not about the auditors or corporate citizens. It's your employees. And the most important people that you give that to is them, and putting out that clear commitment intent and engaging with them. Now, when we meet with farmers, we start the journey with talking about this one, but then I talk about the other health and safety policies that relate to specific health and safety issues. And the critical ones that we strongly recommend to farmers, they really, really should have, working in reverse order in terms of priority. We do suggest, because of the high levels of outdoor work and sun exposure and UV, skin cancer risks, a UV policy is a good thing to have. We do have concerns about workers wearing their safety gear and personal protective equipment, respirators, masks, gloves, and a personal protective equipment policy, again, is a good thing to have. We do have concerns about the risk potential of a worker potentially coming into the workplace under the influence of drugs or alcohol. And there's a fair amount of history in that regard in terms of incidents, and also in regional areas with particularly pockets of Victoria, it's known that there's been instances or occurrences with high volumes of drug usage in particular parts of Victoria. But we get to more pointed matters, and we strongly recommend that a business should definitely have a bullying, harassment, discrimination type policies, and also sexual harassment. Now, with bullying and harassment type matters, if an episode of bullying was to occur in a workplace, a worker can take their complaints through multiple channels. They can lodge a workers' compensation claim. They can call WorkSafe. They can lodge their complaints with the Victorian or Australian Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission, or the Fair Work Commission. Now, with those other agencies, Fair Work, Human Rights Equal Opportunity Commission, when they deal with these matters, they can issue orders. They can instruct, make the employer do particular things to address the behaviour in the workplace. They can provide civil remedies, as in fines and penalties, or not fines, but award damages to a worker. And I explained to the employer that they are civil remedies. But if WorkSafe were to get involved, and particularly if a worker suffered adverse health effects and or, heaven forbid, took their life, and therefore WorkSafe involved in investigating those matters, WorkSafe would be looking at it in a criminal context and recognise the difference between OH&S law and other forms of law. It's criminal legislation. And so really important that you would have those sorts of policies and procedures in place in your business. Now, when we make the policy procedure templates available to business, there's a really strong bit of advice we give them, and that is that when we make them available, you would not take them and put on your letterhead and say, there you go, we're covered. If you put those things out there, you've got to do what they say. And so the most pointed example would be if you had a personal protective equipment policy, and it makes clear to your employees that you provide PPE, you expect them to use it and maintain it, and also says that if they don't wear it, or if they're seen breaching the policy, that yes, appropriate disciplinary action may be taken. But also stressing the point that you've got to lead by example. And the obvious ones that come up every time in this regard would be quad bikes and motorcycles and side-by-side vehicles, and the wearing of helmets. And just to be sure, there's no grey from a legal point of view as to where the buck stops, as to where the lines of responsibility rest. That yes, it is an employer's duty to provide a safe workplace and safe systems of work, and that is to ensure that they provide adequate training, instruction, and supervision. And supervision is the key word there, and that includes making sure that they do supervise to make sure that the workers do the right thing. And so, but the value of having policy procedures and engaging and putting them in place in the right way. We do see farmers who do have folders full of OH&S documentation. They've bought a safety management system, or they've the industry bodies have provided various safety resources over time. There are software platforms that are out there, but we explain the dangers of having what we refer to as a system on a shelf. What we're keen to do is not just to make the resources available, but also to guide farmers around their legal responsibilities and to make sure they use these things and know how to put them in place. One of the most important things that we've done over the last few years is telling farmers things they don't know. And a big part of the time we spend at dining tables is carefully talking through what the legal requirements are, but also guiding farmers around how they can practically meet those responsibilities. I'm going to share my screen again. With your policy procedures, 2 key points in time which you use your policy procedures. Number one, first and foremost, is when someone starts with your business, your induction process. And I'm just confirming that you can see, Kayla put their hand, gives me a thumbs up just to say that you can see the induction checklist. Yep, cool, thank you. Now, ideally, when someone starts their business on day one, this is the first time you think about using your policy procedures. You start off with things like tax file number, banking details, superannuation, all the employment-related stuff that you've got to go through and make sure you cover those parts. But immediately after that, policy, 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 and making sure you make clear to a new employee what your expectations are from day one. All employers in Victoria have the key duty under the legislation to provide a safe place and system of work. And that duty is underpinned by a couple of pillars. And one of those pillars, most importantly, is the duty to provide adequate information, instruction, training, and supervision as is necessary to enable their employees to work in a safe manner. It's a combination of all of those four words that would be looked at by a judge or magistrate objectively, if an incident were to occur. But training and instruction from day one, especially for a young or inexperienced worker, or for any worker for that matter, really, really important in your induction process. So you take them through your policy procedures, you take them through things like first aid, emergency procedures, reporting of accidents and injuries, make them aware of specific hazards and risks they need to be aware of on your farm, and make sure that you are covering off with them the things they need to know from a safety point of view from day one. Now, you take the employee through that process and they would sign off on that for you. That sign off there does not shift the legal onus onto them. It does not make them accountable, responsible. It doesn't shift the legal burden. It doesn't make you any less accountable, responsible. What that is most importantly for your business is evidence that shows and demonstrates you're providing a safe workplace by providing training and instruction from day one. And so over the last year or so, we've really put heavy emphasis through our newsletters and making resources available through our website to help guide farmers through how to undertake inductions. And that induction template is available on the Making Our Farm Safer website. Now, beyond the induction, we then explain that it's not just your induction. You should also use your policy procedures individually throughout the course of the year to give to your employees to initiate some discussion with them about those safety matters as well. And in doing that, you go a long way towards meeting another key legal responsibility that employers have under OH&S law, and that is a duty to consult with workers about matters that affect their safety. Now, when I raise the idea of consultation with a lot of farmers at the dining table, I know already that many of them would have in their heads, oh, we talk to the guys about safety all the time. And it's second nature that from day to day, when we undertake work, there will be safety issues attached to the way we're doing the work. And that'll be a natural part of conversation to talk about those things at that time. But then I explain to them that in terms of that legal requirement to provide a safe workplace, and in particular, to meet a duty to consult with workers about matters that affect their safety, that the expectation is broader than that. And it is also including that employers should talk about bullying and harassment, drugs and alcohol, sexual harassment, and these other things. And so in terms of guiding employers around how to use their systems or use their policy procedures, we do suggest to them OH&S should be on the agenda in a formal sense at least once a month. The constancy is part of running your business. You have what is referred to throughout industry as having a toolbox meeting. Gather around, everyone, come in and have a sit down in the shed, or come into the house, have a bit of cake or a bit of coffee, and we're just going to talk about a few safety issues. And as I work through all the hazards and all the risks and talk about the policy procedures, not only do we provide a toolbox meeting template as part of our resources, but we actually also guide farmers through how to have toolbox meetings and also how to record them and keep records that demonstrate they're meeting their duty to consult. I know from experience, having helped a lot of businesses with hazards and issues such as bullying and harassment, for example, and even small micro-sized businesses with just a few employees, that nothing's an issue until something goes wrong, and they might have a bullying issue that's brewing in the workplace. And if WorkSafe or one of the other legal agencies were to be involved in those matters, I can assure you that virtually the first question that will come up is, do you have a bullying policy? And that'll be followed quickly by, show us the evidence you've disseminated it. And so having the policies in the first place, but making sure that you communicate and engage with your employees. And that's fine from a legal point of view, protecting yourself in those regards. But then again, I come back to tie it in with meeting your legal responsibilities and providing a safe workplace. The hypothetical question that I ask farmers on a day-to-day basis, and there's no right or wrong answer to these questions, would be, if you thought strategically, breaking the calendar up, January, February, March, right through the course of the year, which month do you think would be a good month to put out a UV policy? And I sometimes get farmers to say November, December, sometimes even as much as February. And there's no right or wrong answers, because UV is a year-round issue. It could even be in March, or it could even be in May. But if we thought strategically again, I might suggest to them around springtime, probably around about September, because that's the time of year when we know that it's obviously getting a little bit warmer, and we might be wearing polar fleece jumpers, but then we want to rip those off, and then we start to get a bit more sun exposure. I might then ask them, what's a great time of year to put out your drug and alcohol policy, and consult with the workers about that. And again, there's no right or wrong answers. And frequently, the answer I get back from the farmer is all year round or every day. And that's probably reflective of what I said earlier around some pockets or regions of Victoria, or the farm's own experience that they've known of instances of people coming into the workplace under the influence, or having a few, or still being, possibly affected by drugs or alcohol. And I explained to them, well, yes, that might be true. But if we thought strategically again, I might say festive season, just before Christmas. Now, it could be Mad Monday around that time, or Grand Final. It could be Melbourne Cup. There's no right or wrong answers. But my point in putting those suggestions too around using these things strategically at various times throughout the course of the year is those things don't just come once. They come once every year. And what we stress is if you put a stake in the ground, you start the journey, this stuff just becomes repeat year on year on year. And so if you have the conversation this year, well, there's a fair chance 12 months later, you're going to have the same conversation again. Now, if you involve and engage your employees, and you talk to them around these issues and involve them in health and safety, hopefully what you get in your business is a culture. A culture they'll say, well, cracking boss to work for, and they are really serious about safety, but they embrace it, they respect where you're coming from, they become part of it. The key is always to get them involved and engage them around the discussions. Now, going back to the Act and the legal requirement there, it is the duty that employers must consult with workers about matters that affect their safety. And that entails that you have to give the workers the opportunity to express their views, and also taking their views into account. Sending documents on an email or through a software platform and getting them to tick a box that they might tick or say they've read it or acknowledge it, that's not consultation. Consultation should be a meaningful two-way exchange where the employer should actually know that they are getting engagement and feedback from workers on the issues that affect their safety. So the legal requirement is that you must consult with workers about matters that affect their safety, must give them the opportunity to express their views, and take their views into account. Now, consultation doesn't mean agreement, because the buck stops with the employer. There's no stipulation in the legislation that there must be agreement. But getting them involved makes eminent sense. They all have ideas, they'll have suggestions, they know the workplace, they live in it and work in it just as much as you do. They'll see things and they'll have ideas around the way things can be done safer. And getting them involved, again, instills that culture, but also helps to instill that belief that you have that you might provide a safe workplace. It's all good for a farmer to say and believe in their hearts or in their minds that they think they provide a safe workplace, but it doesn't really mean anything if the employees don't agree. And having that confidence that you've engaged them and involved them, and having active discussions around the safety issues in your workplace, can give you a much greater sense of confidence that that belief in your brain that it is safe. Well, you'd have a fair bit more confidence if the employees agree with you that that is the case. Now, I'd love to say it's an ideal world and we always agree with each other and we always see eye to eye on safety issues. But one of the parts of the legislation actually recognises that there can be occasion where differences of opinion arise. And the legislation actually enables employers to have something referred to as a health and safety issue resolution procedure. And you should see that on the screen now. Now, the legislation enables that if an employer having this, if they were to have such a procedure in their workplace and give it to their employees, it must be an agreed procedure. And so you would get some confirmation or acknowledgement from your employees that they've read this, and also that they accept this as the way you would resolve safety issues. But to start off, where you see that opening paragraph there, that we are committed to safety, and where issues arise, we're committed to resolving those issues in a timely manner. It would then outline the steps you would try and take to work through the safety issues, and those steps are prescribed through the dot points there, and they are actually prescribed in law. And so through the OH&S Act and the regulations where you see those dot points, the legislation provides for that structure, that if you ever had a dispute or a difference about safety issues, you must follow those steps and have regard for those steps in terms of resolving the safety issue. Now, the legislation also enables that an industry association or a union may be involved for the purpose of issue resolution. And so if you are a VFF member, yes, you could insert that if you needed assistance in terms of working through a safety issue, you could call on assistance from the VFF safety team. Now, I can assure you, if your worker was right or you were right, either way, I can guarantee we're not going to lead you down the garden path or tell you something that you want to hear. We're going to make sure that you get accurate legal advice and safety advice, and make sure that you manage those issues properly. And then, having followed that process, then the procedure then enables that, yes, they may call WorkSafe. Now, that's in the procedure, but note that irrespective of whether you got the procedure or not, on any given day, a worker may call WorkSafe and assist WorkSafe with their inquiries. And an employer cannot have a go at them or take disciplinary action or terminate them or disadvantage them. And if an employer were to take any such action, that can be taken to be discrimination, for which WorkSafe can investigate and prosecute. And also the worker has a right to sue. Now, I'm not aware of any instances where a worker has sued, but certainly over time, from year to year, there are occasions where WorkSafe have prosecuted employers for discrimination on health and safety grounds. Now, the flip side of that, and exactly why it exists in the legislation, is for an employer to have an issue resolution procedure. Now, WorkSafe come onto farms for one of three reasons. They come out in respect to their own strategic campaigns, and with due respect to them, they haven't done much over the last couple of years, and fair enough because of COVID. They did run a campaign on hort farms for a while there. The campaign, which they launched back in August this year, which will run over a period of 2 to 3 years, is the cattle campaign. And so throughout the various times over the next coming months, there will be WorkSafe inspectors who will predominantly focus on cattle farms and probably a few dairy farms along the way. Now, that's not to say they won't visit all the other farms, the grain farmers and the sheep farmers or anyone else there. They'll all still get potentially visits, and yes, they do random visits to workplaces. And so it's on any given day, they have legal authority to enter any workplace which is a workplace. And so on any given day, an employer could have a visit from an inspector. They come out in regards to accidents or incidents, and I've certainly dealt with enough of those over time and assisted a number of employers. And you'll hear about those in the press and on the radio and in the newspapers. And touch wood, hopefully in the closeout of the year, we don't have any further incidents. But nearly 50%, currently it's about 48% of WorkSafe visits to farms in Victoria are response calls. And that is where somebody has called them in. Now, that could be a union official, it could be the next door neighbour, it could be a concerned citizen, but the vast majority of those calls actually come from within the workplace and from employees. Now, that could be a young or inexperienced worker who's not confident to raise issues with the boss. It could be a worker that has tried raising issues with the boss, but the boss hasn't addressed those concerns, and so they still have ongoing safety concerns and want to get the issues resolved and addressed. Occasionally, sadly and disappointingly, it's also the worker that says, well, bugger you, boss, I'll get WorkSafe on you. They may have been given a rev up for being late or for not doing the job properly, and so their fallback is to call WorkSafe in, thinking that WorkSafe will put the wind up the employer. Doesn't matter the scenario. The value and the importance is to have the right processes in place to deal with these issues. And if an employer were able to say to a WorkSafe inspector on the premise that it is a call out, look, we wish our employee come and spoke to us first in accordance with that issue resolution procedure, the inspector would have regard for that. And they would say, well, look, you sort out the problem, you let us know the outcome, because that's exactly why that procedure and the legislation provides for that. If, however, you didn't have such a procedure, the inspector would say, well, look, we'll come in now because we should and we need to, and we'll resolve the issues using our full suite of powers, potentially issuing notices. And so the whole intent of having this in the legislation is to enable employers to resolve safety issues in a proactive manner in the workplace. Now, when would you cover the OH&S policy and the issue resolution procedure? In your induction, and you make sure you make the new employee aware of those things, but also thereafter at a toolbox meeting. Just quickly, in the wording in the issue resolution procedure, it does also refer to a management representative, and that is that a business can actually name a person within the business who would be the management representative for the purpose of resolving issues. If an employer does nominate a person by name, that person must have sufficient seniority within the business and also be deemed competent. By WorkSafe's definition, that is that the person has completed at least 6 days training. Now, I know fully well there's very, very few farmers, especially small businesses, who are going to go off and do 6-day training courses. That's not going to happen. My advice would be leave the procedure as it is and defer to ourselves, consistent with the legislation that you can seek external assistance professionally from either an industry association or a union. And the union side of it is for the workers. But if they wanted to nominate a union to be part of that, well, they can do so as well. Now, I know fully well that the simple nature of these things, if you were to give it to your employees, you're not going to get much resistance. And they're going to acknowledge that this makes sense because it does in terms of the law providing for it, but also the way it's structured. Now, I spoke about the importance of training and instruction in terms of inductions and also manager supervisor training, but I'll talk about training more broadly in terms of ensuring safety on farms in Victoria. The OH&S Act and regulations, they are performance-based legislation. And that is, when I say that, they're not prescriptive. They don't prescribe every type of training that an employer has to provide in terms of specific legal requirements that you must provide training on a quad bike or a tractor or a header. And for a lot of those things, the courses are simply not there. They don't exist. There are some training institutions such as TAFEs and service providers around the state and around the country who do provide training in some of those areas. Not legally required, but certainly worthwhile. But people might go and do training and then get a certificate of attainment to say they've attended training, and therefore hopefully that improves their skills or knowledge. But the vast majority of training delivered by farmers to ensure a safe workplace is delivered by farmers themselves on the farm. One of the resources we make available when we meet with farmers at the dining table is we provide a variety of competency checklists to enable farmers to assess their own employees, their satisfaction that they are competent in performing particular tasks and activities. If you can see that list there, and I'll go to the example, the best example, the one that always causes a lot of anxiety for farmers is a chainsaw, and particularly notable with the strong winds and bad weather we've had lately, a few trees and branches down. I've seen it on the road. And yeah, if you get a strong, big storm, and you've got branches everywhere, you need to get wood chopped up and get the logs off the road. Well, someone's going to have to get out there and swing the chainsaw around. And a farmer always has anxiety about swinging a young buck a chainsaw. Ideally, what you would do is make sure that they're capable and competent before you give them, set them those tasks. And you can see there that list there available to download again off our Making Our Farm Safer website, a list of competency checklists that a farmer can use to assess their own employees. There are good software platforms that have competency checklists and assessment tools within them that do enable farmers to assess their employees, including asking competency-based questions where the worker has to actually answer questions and work their way through. That's also a useful means of verifying and satisfying yourselves that the workers are competent in performing tasks before you give them those tasks. Just on some of those tasks there, and I'll go back to the chainsaw one as an example though. Farmers will often say to me, oh, look, we wouldn't get a kid to do that. We'd do that job ourselves. But what I know from experience is two things there. That's also an admission from farmers that they do all the high-risk work, and that's an issue in itself, given that farmers are overrepresented in farming accidents and fatalities. That is the farmers themselves. But also monkey see, monkey do. The worker sees that, they're keen, they want to help. And if the need arises and the workload's there to be done, they may go and pick up the chainsaw and, with good intent and best will, but not necessarily be skilled and competent in operating it. And if an accident occurs, what would be looked at is, did you provide adequate training, instruction, supervision, and information as is necessary? And so having sort of training records is really, really important. In that list there is a blank template to enable farmers to create their own. And there's also one in particular, which is a telehandler under 3 tonne. Now, in terms of legislation and prescribing training, there are 2 forms of machinery that are used on farms in Victoria where there are prescribed legal requirements for people to go and obtain a license from WorkSafe. And that is for a forklift or a telehandler over 3 tonne. Now, with telehandlers over 3 tonne, a source of much contention in the industry, WorkSafe have been enforcing on farms when they visited farms and issued notices a requirement for operators of telehandlers over 3 tonne to have a crane license. And that's been a significant burden on the industry, 4 days training. Previously, up until October 21, it was actually a prerequisite dogging course, which is an additional 5 days. And we already knew that there's a heavy degree of non-compliance in the industry in terms of meeting those expectations. And it was not actually legislative based. It's just that WorkSafe decided to apply that as policy. Because of that agitation and pushback from VFF, there have been moves to create a new telehandler license for Victoria. There has been developed a new unit of competency for training, and there's still argument about the content and how long it will take to deliver that. And we are trying to push that it should be no more than 2 days training. Our concern is that it may end up being 3. Now, that requirement will kick in law with amendments to the OH&S regulations to introduce a new telehandler specific license in Victoria, and that will kick in from 1 July 2024. And we'll work with WorkSafe. We'll keep on still arguing about the duration of the training. We'll try and get it down to 2 days. We'll try and get all the crane competencies that a farmer's never going to use and make sure it's suited and meets the needs of industry. And also then work with WorkSafe to get the training providers out into regional Victoria and try and obviously help farmers to go and do that training. But I make it clear, whilst it's arguable that WorkSafe could lead evidence as it is now that the person didn't have an appropriate license for the crane license, from 1 July next year, there'll be no grey. A telehandler license for any telehandler over 3 tonne will be an explicit legal requirement. And WorkSafe would, in the event of a telehandler incident, be able to lead evidence in a court of law that the operator should have had a license. Now, to get a license for a forklift or a telehandler, that would require they go to a registered training organisation. They learn about the machinery, but also are assessed and put through their paces in terms of operation and manoeuvring of the machinery. Then deemed competent, given a certificate of competency by the training provider, and then applying to WorkSafe for the WorkSafe issued photo ID license, which are valid for 5 years thereafter. Now, renewal of the high-risk work licenses is not requiring retraining. It's reapplying for the license and then making a declaration at that time that the person is still competent and they've used that equipment over time, and then they'll be issued a license for a further 5 years. But to forklifts in particular, where I see them on Hort and some grain farms, and also the telehandlers, make sure that if the licenses are relevant or applicable to your business, that you have those licenses. Now, on the subject of licenses, given we're on a theme in terms of subjects, I then talk to farmers about the importance of making sure that they do check from time to time their employees' driver's licenses. Not an OH&S issue, but a insurance risk liability issue that insurers have on occasion refused to cover employers by failing to verify that they've got the appropriate driver's licenses. Now, a worker may not tell you if they blew 05 or 130k down the highway. They're worried about losing their license. They're worried about their job security. And they may not necessarily make you a note of that. They may say, well, look, it's only 6 months, I'll get by and I'll still drive to work and still drive the vehicles around. And if they have an accident, though, the risk then is that would you have adequate insurance cover? Now, to all the things that I've talked about, inductions, toolbox meetings, consultation, all of those things are issue resolution, licenses. They're all covered in the first few pages of the handbook. And what I bring you now to is what I describe with the farmer at the dining table as their first toolbox meeting. Now, in the handbook, when I took these things through, we created what we call toolbox meeting scripts, which are written under the guise of a hypothetical farmer having a chat with their employees about a few safety issues. And I'm going to start reciting as if you're all my employees. So gather around, everyone, and come and have a sit down. I hope you're enjoying your dinner. We're going to sit down and talk about a few safety issues. Here is my OH&S policy. So that first one I spoke of, here it is, guys, in black and white. We are fair dinkum about your safety. Not that you ever had any reason to doubt that, but here's some nice words in a bit of paper that reflect that. And in terms of being serious about safety, law requires we consult with you about safety. Well, we talk about safety every day when we're doing our work. We talk about it in the sheds and out in the paddock, but maybe once a month or so, from time to time, we'll go through this sort of process where we'll bring you in and just talk about other issues and also still talk about the day-to-day issues as well. And if by chance we ever have a situation where there's any sort of difference between us or any sort of argy-bargy, this is how we work through these issues, by following this issue resolution procedure, and you step the employees through that process. Are you okay with that? Do you understand that? That's the way we do things here. And this is how we work through and resolve any safety issues. And while we're here, guys, from time to time, I need you to jump in the ute and, run the truck into town. And on that basis, I would like to see and check and verify your driver's license. And after the meeting, I'll come and see you individually, and I'm going to write down your license numbers and the expiry dates. And if by chance we were to go and bring a young worker in or a new employee, what do you think we'd show them from an induction point of view and get their feedback on your induction? Now, what you see there, and this features in our handbook, is an example of how to record toolbox meetings. And so what you'd write down, yes, spoke to Tom, Dick, Harriet, Fred. You write down their names or you get them to sign off. It doesn't matter. The key is having the evidence that shows you're meeting your legal duty, consult with your employees about matters that affect their safety. And so even just having their names written down is sufficient. But the main detail is what you see down below that: issued OH&S policy, issued issue resolution procedure, spoke to the employees about the induction process for new employees, sought the feedback on the license, talked about telehandler licenses. And that's the detail. That's the evidence that shows how you consult with your employees and ensuring a safe workplace. You still raise issues and you'll still talk about issues from day to day, but our advice, consistent with the plan, is OH&S to be on the agenda at least once a month, and trying to keep it practical and achievable for farmers to do these things. I'll talk about broader issues related to the farm, and we go to public safety. Under OH&S law, employers have a duty of care not just to employees and contractors, which I'll come back to a bit later, but to the public at large. And yes, if a member of the public is hurt on your farm, you can be prosecuted by WorkSafe. Farmers that worry me are those who engage in allowing people to come in for shooting, recreational, hunting type activities, camping on their properties. And I strongly recommend to the farmer that they shouldn't just let these people in willy-nilly or just giving them free rein. They should induct them. Now, I'm not talking about a full-blown employee-style induction, but meeting with them, making sure that there are emergency procedures in place, contact phone numbers, that they have first aid facilities, fire extinguishers, that you know what they're up to, but also where they're going to base themselves, and giving them clear instruction that they will stay and remain in those areas. If they trespass, and this is an issue obviously with the legislation that provided for camping on Crown land and riverfronts, or if they climb over your fence, well, that's beyond your control, and you're not going to be responsible if someone is breaking the law and trespassing on your property. But if they're coming with your blessing, you need to manage that risk. Now, farmers often perceive and appreciate there might be some risk in terms of insurance and public liability insurance risk. They're often oblivious to the fact that there is actually potentially criminal risk with WorkSafe, that WorkSafe could investigate the matter. And if someone was, for example, run over by a ram, or crushed by kicked by a bull, or badly hurt climbing some fencing or something, you need to be aware that that is a matter that WorkSafe could look at. First aid, and when we do the walk around the farm, I am saying to the farmer, you're going to show me where your first aid kit is. It's amazing how many times the bewilderment and the eyes raising and puzzlement in their heads is they actually then think, well, where's the first aid kit? And then obviously when I do get to them, I'm going to say to them, I'm going to crack it open, have a look at the appearance, the currency of the stock, make sure that everything's in date, the bandages haven't perished. They do have expiry dates on all the various ingredients. Make sure there are scissors and tweezers. And we do see a lot of first aid kits that are in very, very poor states of repair, covered in dust, and not fit for purpose. Rather than saying to the farmer, go out and buy a new first aid kit because the cabinets are expensive and there's no point in throwing everything out. Often I might be saying to them, just take that first aid kit down to the pharmacy in town and hand it over the counter and just ask the pharmacy to restock them for you. Or go to the first, like St. John's or safety suppliers and buy a new first aid kit. But yes, there's no grey. You should definitely have adequate first aid facilities on your farm. Now, apart from having the first aid kits, then yes, the expectation is that you will ensure there are appropriate people who can manage injuries in the workplace, and that is to have a level 2 first aid qualification, or as it's commonly referred to, occupational first aid. And that qualification is valid for 3 years, and then the training needs to be done again. There are annual CPR refreshers, and they're not mandated as such, but certainly worthwhile. But in the absolute minimum, there should definitely be someone that is trained to level 2 first aid. And that person should be able to meet the majority of contingencies, as in they should be available for the most of the time they're in there on the farm. With small businesses in particular, I say to them and strongly recommend to them the value of, if you can afford it, to not just put yourself, but put your employees through first aid. They are so valuable, and obviously give people skills they can use on the farm, but also outside in the broader community. And not that expensive, and plenty of service providers out there available across regional Victoria, but also through St. John's in particular. And so definitely make sure you've got someone trained, at least one person in first aid in your business. In terms of managing injuries in the workplace, and for employers and farmers that do have employees, to be clear, work cover obligations, work cover insurance is statutory insurance. Employers must have it if their annual wage bill is more than $7,500 in a year, and or if they engage an apprentice. Now, with work cover insurance, there's a couple of legal responsibilities that come with that apply to the workplace. And one of those is to have a poster on display in the workplace called the If You're Injured poster. And that is actually required to be displayed prominently in the workplace. And I'm typically suggesting on the fridge or in the lunchroom or on a notice board in the shed. Now, WorkSafe, through our social media channels on making our farm safer through Facebook and LinkedIn and the like, we shared a WorkSafe post just a couple of days ago with the link to the most current version of the If You're Injured poster. The poster you download ideally would have your work cover agent's details on it. And so there's 4 work cover agents, and so you just make sure you pick and download the one that's relevant to your particular agent. And that poster advises workers and makes them aware of their rights to make a workers' compensation claim. And as I said, that's a legal requirement under the Work Act, Workplace Injury Rehabilitation and Compensation Act, to have that posted on display in the workplace. Now, the other requirement is to have what's referred to as a Register of Injuries book. And that is a facility for an injured worker to record their injury details. Now, in the book, when a worker fills it out, or the supervisor, there's a statement where the boss would sign off down the bottom of the page, and it would read, "I acknowledge the employee's reported injury to me." That is not an admission of liability. It's just acknowledging of their making of the report. Now, a worker legally, under the legislation, has 30 days in which to report an injury to their employer. And if they fail to report the injury to their employer within that 30-day period because they are ignorant of that requirement, their workers' compensation claim will be accepted. Now, that sounds extraordinary, but what that is actually designed and the way it was crafted in the legislation is to put a positive onus on the employer to make the employees aware of the procedures of reporting of accidents and injuries in their business. And so when would you do that? Again, at your induction, but also at a toolbox meeting. Now, we know fully well that workers won't fill it out for the Band-Aid job. They'll go to the first aid kit, whack on a Band-Aid, and they'll go back to work. What you want to make clear to your employees is any sort of off-site medical treatment, so a doctor's or hospital sort of visit, or any sort of sprain or strain type injury in particular, so anything like a shoulder, neck, back, anything like that, definitely gets reported down in your book. And your message to your employees, we don't want to hear about it 30 days later. We want to hear about it immediately. so we can get you fixed up and make sure you're taken care of, but also if we can address that hazard so that we make sure it doesn't happen again. And so, but I stress the importance that you should definitely communicate with your employees about what your expectations are for reporting of accidents and injuries. In terms of accidents or injuries, there are certain types of incidents that when they occur are referred to as notifiable, in that they must be reported through to WorkSafe immediately. The worst case scenario, heaven forbid, if there was a death in the workplace, well, absolutely, WorkSafe would expect to be informed of that. The criteria include deaths, amputations, serious lacerations, someone rendered unconscious in the workplace, electrocutions, someone admitted to hospital as an inpatient overnight. Also, events that have potential to cause serious harm or injury, for example, a structural collapse of a building, a tractor rollover, quad bike rollover. Even if no one's hurt, but they are in proximity to the incident, WorkSafe are also still required to be notified. Not only required to notify them, but also preserve the scene of an incident until such time as inspector advised you or the call centre confirms that you're okay to resume your work. You're required to preserve the scene until you've got that all clear. Now, the police, fires, or AMBOs, the emergency services, are often the first responders to incidents, and often if it's a workplace incident or fatality and it's serious, they will call WorkSafe. Irrespective of whether they do notify WorkSafe, the legal owner still rests with the employer to make that call. And so be aware of that. Keep that in the memory banks. Heaven forbid, touch wood, that you ever have to notify WorkSafe of a serious incident, but be aware that it is a legal responsibility to make that call. And the number is 132360. And so you would simply ring them and make the call to them. Now, there's actually dozens, and sometimes even in the order of hundreds of notifiables reported through to WorkSafe. And most of those come from the construction industry, where there's a very high degree of knowledge, and from manufacturing sectors. But we actually have very heavy underreporting in the agricultural sector. And that's because of a lack of awareness and knowledge about incident notification. An incident notification is not with a view to fines or prosecution. It's not necessarily with a view to them sending an inspector out. And for many matters, when the call is lodged with the call centre, the key focus is on secondary prevention. And so the main focus is what happened, which you would obviously tell them, and then they'd ask, what have you done to control the situation so no one else gets hurt? And often matters will resolve and stop there, even with, for example, a serious laceration or a really bad wound. There's many instances where WorkSafe simply do not have the time or resource to have inspectors follow up on all of them. Just note, however, heaven forbid that you did have a really serious accident or incident in your workplace. And when I say about WorkSafe attending the workplace, it won't be just an inspector. It may be actually 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. And the fourth one would be an investigator. And they would be looking at it with a view to potentially criminal investigation and inquiring into whether there was a breaches of the OH&S Act regulations. Now, I study obviously what WorkSafe do religiously, and obviously passionate for the industry. And I count each and every incident and fatality that I read about in the paper. My first instinct is, God, I hope it's not a VFF member. And then the second instinct then is, God, I hope they call me. And when farmers ring me up, and word of mouth has been a very powerful instrument since I started the VFF, that bloke who's had me at the dining table, he rings his mate down the road who's had the accident and says, give this guy a call. And what I would do is I would take stock. I would ask for as much information as I can get. And sometimes I need to say to the farmer, you need legal advice. And I would put them into the hands of a lawyer who practices OH&S law. It is a specialist area of law. And unfortunately, over there's been 25, and that's since October 2020, 25 work-related farm fatalities. And I've assisted a number of those farmers after those incidents, and it's the work that I'd rather not do. But be aware of and keep in the memory banks your obligations to notify WorkSafe of notifiable incidents, and heaven forbid you had to. Emergency procedures on your farm. And when I'm doing the walk around in the sheds and my eyes start darting around left, right, and center, and I'm seeing things really, really quickly, I'm going to look to the left or right of the door into the machinery shed, the shearing shed, maybe in the chemical shed. And I'm recommending to the farmer, they go down to Bunnings, they buy a couple of whiteboards or chipboards or notice boards. And on those notice boards, they would put down their emergency procedures. Number one, the list of emergency contact phone numbers. So 000, obviously, gas, water, electricity, nearest hospital, nearest medical clinic. You got a bloke that's got a bad laceration. The nearest hospital is 25 k's away. We can't wait for the ambulance. We need to get him in the car. We're ringing the hospital to let them know we're on our way. But the nearest doctor's clinic is 5k down the road. And so rather than having to get him off to hospital, we know that medical attention is much closer at hand. We're ringing the doctor's surgery, and we've got their address up on the wall. Alongside that, a floor plan. And I'm not talking about your whole acreage, what I see on a lot of farms, the magnificent diagrams of all their paddocks and all their pastures and the huge acreage. I'm talking about just a localized plan of your sheds and buildings. And Google Maps or Google Earth is really handy for taking nice overhead shots from above of farms. And so just your local sheds, your shearing shed, machinery shed, chemical shed, workshops, home. And on that, where practical, note the location of the first aid kits, the fire extinguishers, and the most important thing of all, the emergency assembly area, X marks the spot. And alongside that, the CFA produced a poster called Standard Fire Orders, which has been around for decades. And that's a basic set of instructions, what to do in emergency situations. If you've got those three things side by side, that's regarded by the authorities as being a basic set of emergency procedures. And so we strongly recommend to farmers they should go down to Bunnings, buy the notice boards, and then put those things up on the wall. But then, yes, make sure you make the new employees aware of those things at the induction, but then bring those things up at the toolbox meeting. And so your next toolbox meeting, gather around everyone, come around, and it's that time again. We're going to talk about a few safety issues. Here are our emergency procedures. Here's the floor plan. Here are the fire extinguishers. Here is the assembly area. Here is the first aid kit. Here's our registered injury book. If you get hurt, any sort of off-site medical treatment or spraying or strain time injury must go down here in the book. And before you go, guys, I was listening to two of the employees on Monday morning have a bit of a discussion about the footy scores. And during that conversation, I heard one employee refer to the other employee as a rabid feral Collins supporter. That's just terrible, it's shocking, and it's wrong because all Collins supporters are wonderful. Now, I'm only mucking around with you, but if ever we had a genuine instance of inappropriate social conduct in our workplace, this is how we would deal with it. Here is our bullying and harassment policy. And get the employees involved in discussion about that. Instill in them that confidence that you do take safety seriously, but also instill in them that belief that if they ever had any concerns, they can come and talk to you about those issues and that they would be confident in raising those issues with you. And again, you would record in the notes, spoke to Tom, Dick, Harriet, Fred, and you'd see the detail that you would record there in your toolbox meeting template or in your diary. If it's a one-man band farmer and he's just got the one employee, even a diary is sufficient, where they just write these things down on a particular day in the calendar. But again, consistent with what we've been saying about OH&S on the agenda at least once a month, starting the journey and just having a crack bit by bit by bit, month by month. Subcontractors. Under OH&S law, employers have the same duty of care to subcontractors as they do their own employees in relation to matters over which they have control. And the key word there, the optimal word being control. An employer can defend themselves on the basis they employer engage work to perform specific tasks, specialist tasks or activities, where they're bringing skills into the farm that are not core or intrinsic to what the farmer needs or does. And so, for example, if they're engaging a plumber or electrician as the best examples, well, you bring them in for a specialist reason, not to do farming work, to do plumbing or electrical work. Now, if you did see them and you knew clear as day that they're standing up on top of the shed, the plumber, doing gutter work, no handrails, no edge protection, well, that's clear as day a matter of control, and you would stop that work. You wouldn't let that happen. But it's important to recognise that, yes, they are the employees in their own right. They have legal duties, and they're obviously bringing in specialist skills and trades into the workplace. Now, with farmers, of course, farmers engage a lot of farming trades, farming contractors, who are essentially performing farming work. And they're working on your farm, on your property, with your employees, often in your sheds or alongside your employees out in the paddocks. And we do recommend to farmers they should induct those trades. They should meet with them, not again the full-blown half-day employee style induction, but even a brief. Okay, here are our emergency procedures. Here's the floor plan of the site. Here are the contact phone numbers, and if an incident occurs, make sure you call us. Be aware of those power lines. Be aware of that particular hazard or that paddock or that slope, that terrain. Okay, shearers, you're working in our sheds. Yes, we won't have any drugs or alcohol in the workplace. We won't have inappropriate behaviour. You will observe our bullying and sexual harassment policies. We do treat each other with courtesy and respect here on our farm. And so even 15, 20 minutes, making sure you communicate with those contractors and their employees about what your expectations are. Note, as I said, the duty is to contractors and their employees to provide. So the overarching responsibility you have. Yes, they are employees in their own right, and yes, they do have legal overarching responsibilities, but you also have an overarching responsibility for their safety as well. Throughout the course of the year with WorkSafe, and they do prosecute more than every other regulator in Australia combined, a number of their prosecutions are multi-employer prosecution, where they will still go after the primary duty holder, for example, the shearer or the spreader fertilizer type company, but then they may also lay charges against the other entity, which is the farmer. And I'm dealing with an example of an incident that's occurred where the farmer is in trouble as well. And with cattle and WorkSafe's cattle campaign, and even in shearing properties, when we talk about vets and livestock agents and livestock transport drivers, it's not just about inducting them or having the right policy procedures, but also being present when they are on the farm. The expectation is that the farmer will be there. Now, this again is consistent with the idea that the farmer controls things such as the first aid provision, the emergency procedures, and also supervising the manner in which the tasks are performed, having knowledge of the animals, obviously knowing about their yards, and making sure they supervise those tasks. In our resources we make available to farmers and software platforms and OH&S systems, there are often contractor documents and tools that farmers can give to subcontractors to get them to fill out and satisfy a range of OH&S criteria. We recognise that if with the one-man band plumber or electrician, if you give them a large OH&S document and say, fill that out for me, their eyes will glaze over and they probably won't have a lot of those things. And so with a lot of those things, it is horses for courses and picking your mark. With large spreader fertilizer type companies and contractors, larger entities, your Victories and those sorts of companies, this stuff is second nature for them. They're not going to balk. They won't shy away from filling out the farmer's contractual OH&S documents. It's routine for them to be exposed to those sorts of things. Now, for a lot of farmers, the reason why they're not being provided by those things by the contractors in the first place is probably because they never asked. But it's not to say that you couldn't give that to them, and that they won't necessarily balk at giving those things to you. Again, I'd probably stress horses for courses in terms of your selection of which contractors you might apply those things to. And yes, there are some good software and platforms out there that do help our business to manage contractors. With contractors, no matter whom they are, be it the one-man band plumber, electrician, or your large corporates, without exception, I would stress to you, you should always make sure you get from them their certificate of currency for their public liability insurance. Now, with public liability, as the name infers, that if a member of the public is hurt on your farm, well, yes, you'd rather know that if any legal action was to be pursued, civil that is, they would go against the contractor's public liability insurance, not yours. More important potentially than a member of the public, though, is your employees. That if your employees were hurt or injured on your farm by the contractor, your employees would have to hit you with a work cover claim. If they were to try and claim against the contractor's insurance, the insurer will say to them, it's an injury which arose in the course of your employment, go and claim work cover. Now, WorkSafe are the regulator of two parts of legislation, the OH&S Act and also the workers' compensation legislation in Victoria. And they do initiate legal proceedings, civil litigation to recover the costs on compensation claims. In between time, if it's one of your employees, you would wear that on your work cover premium. And to minimise that risk, strongly recommend you definitely get from them their public liability certificate of currency. You note the date their policy expires and you ask them again at that time. Now, if they have apprentices or if they bring employees with them, no harm also in asking for their work cover certificate of currency to verify they've got work cover insurance for their employees. But in the absolute minimum, make sure you always get from the contractors their public liability insurance details. Now, it's at this stage that I'm going to just go to a bigger picture and explain how all the various pieces are fit together, and also the potential risks and consequences, but also provide clarity around where the lines of responsibility rest. So simply for the, this is in the handbook, and again, I've just cut and paste text there, but this is really talking to the detail. So you have the OH&S Act, that's underpinned by the OH&S Regulations 2017. You also have the Dangerous Goods Act that WorkSafe enforce, and I'll talk about that later in terms of chemical safety on the farm. And they're underpinned by what are referred to as compliance codes that underpin the regulations in the various chapters, and they provide practical guidance. So they're not the laws as such, the compliance codes, but they're an important resource for business to clarify and help them understand how to meet their legal responsibilities. But the key instruments, the actual legislation and the things that are enforceable, are the Act and the regulations. Now, in the Act, that is where it provides for the primary duty for employers to provide a safe place and system of work for their employee so far as is reasonably practicable. And that duty is underpinned by the pillars, as I refer to them, this you see through the dot points there. And so in terms of ensuring a safe workplace, it is that you will provide adequate training, instruction, supervision as is necessary. That you'll provide adequate facilities and amenities, toilets, lunchrooms, and facilities for your employees to be able to use. They will provide and maintain plant, machinery, equipment, and systems of work that are associated with the use of that stuff in the workplace to ensure that they are safe without risk to health. They will provide adequate storage and handling and use of substances and chemicals in the workplace, and that you will maintain a safe workplace. Now, when you see that detail there, that is sufficient, that corridor, as you see it there, for WorkSafe to enforce the law when things go wrong. And WorkSafe, as I said, not a criticism, do prosecute more than every other regulator in Australia combined, about 130 times per year. And the vast majority of charges are a subset of that primary duty in the main part, and then supplementary charges for failing to meet those other parts of the duties. And the most common one is failure to provide adequate training, instruction, supervision. And so that's often thrown as a supplementary charge. Now, the consequence that comes with this stuff, and in the event of an accident or incident occurring, would be potentially a maximum fine of $1.19 million, or for an office or organisation, the capacity for an individual to be charged a maximum fine of $382,000. For clarity, an officer is not a supervisor or a foreman or a manager as such. These are persons who are defined under the Corporations Act as persons who make decisions for and on behalf of a business. And so we are talking about the boss, the CEO, the person who actually runs the business. And in corporates upstream, where they may have directors or people in offices in the city who manage and run farms, they need to be aware of their legal risks and responsibilities, because the buck stops with them, either in a corporate sense and or potentially personally. Now, that duty and those penalties have existed and are indexed each year, just a part of a natural process of indexation. But then introduced in Victoria from 1 July 2020, the additional offence of workplace manslaughter that carries, applies in the event of a death of a worker, that charge can be laid. And that carries with it potentially a maximum penalty of $19.1 million or 25 years jail. And WorkSafe Victoria, there has not been a test case as yet, but WorkSafe so far have laid charges against 5 entities. And my biggest worry, of course, is which farmer or farming entity is going to be first. And sadly, I can see possibly 1 or 2 that might be at risk of such a consequence. Now, in terms of meeting your duties, if I was sitting at the dining table with you, we'd be talking and having conversation around these things. And I would say to you that I would think that you are definitely intelligent people. And so I can see you're nodding at your cameras, even though you're on the black screen, yes, but you say, yes, we are intelligent. And I would also say that you are very objective people. In the context of whether you meet your duties or not, the objective person who would make that judgment as to whether you did or not will be the judge or magistrate. And they would look at objectively whether you meet your duty so far as is reasonably practicable. In determining whether you met those duties, they would look at the likelihood of an accident or incident occurring, the degree of harm that would result as a consequence of the incident occurring, the ways and means that are available to prevent the incident occurring, the cost, and cost is referred to as a test of gross disproportion, as in the cost versus of doing that thing versus the prevention of harm and or death. And the one that brings people undone the most is what a person knows or reasonably to know. One of our biggest concerns in our industry has been the push from some farmers and the resistance towards fitting of operator protective devices, or the bars, on quad bikes. And I would say with the state of knowledge as it's evolved, the fact that there was millions of dollars funding provided for farmers to be able to fit those bikes, I have grave concern if an accident were to occur with quad bikes, which there's still plenty of, and someone was to die, that a judge would easily say straight away, you really ought to have known by this time that you should have had those bars on the bike. And so there's an example of something that, where they might look at it in an objective sense in terms of state of knowledge and what expectations are. Now, the duty to provide a safe workplace is underpinned by an expectation for yourselves as employers or as in a business that you will identify and control the risks in your workplace. And that duty is repeated in the various chapters of the regulations. So it's the same theme: identify and control in the Act, but then getting down to each of the specific chapters and regulations, the same thing: identify and control those specific hazards relevant to the chapters and the regulations. And we'll come back to those in a minute. And controlling the hazards risks in the farm, the expectation is that you will have regard for this thing referred to as the hierarchy of control. Now, working from top to bottom, in an ideal world, it'd be totally risk-free. We'd eliminate every hazard and risk. We'd have none. But fair enough, we've got to start somewhere. So that's the question you ask first: is can we eliminate the risk? For all my experience with OH&S and dealing across multiple industries, there's not often I can think of many readily available options to eliminate. But in agriculture, cattle farmers are one of the first ones to give me that. When they talk about that really, really bad-tempered bull that's really badly behaved, you cull it out of the herd, you get rid of it. And so, yes, if it's so dire or so dangerous that you really ought not be doing it, then that's what you do. You just don't do it. You eliminate the risk. But in reality, and in a practical sense, no, we've got a farm to run, and and it's not necessarily viable to eliminate the risk. So we work our way down the hierarchy. Can we substitute the risk? We've got spray product A that we put out in the paddocks that is particularly hazardous. We've got another brand that is less hazardous that does exactly the same job. We'll use that one. We'll substitute the side-by-side vehicle for the quad bike because they are definitely safer and more stable. And so we'll switch from quad bikes to the side-by-side vehicles. So substituting one for another. Isolating the risk. We've got the guy or the girl that goes out in the paddock. They've got the respiratory gear on. They're driving inside the cabin. They're protected from all the stuff they're spraying out there in the paddock. But the rest of us work over here. We take ourselves away from that particular risk. Or we've got a noisy compressor or a generator that's chugging along, making a fair bit of noise, potentially causing harm to our hearing, but we'll come off and we'll leave that on its own over there. We'll work over here. Then comes engineering controls, the things you physically built into your workplace to make the job safer. And this is where your bulkier focus needs to be. And so, for example, if we are doing work at heights and up on the roofs, we will provide physical fall protection. We will put up handrails. We will put up a scaffold. If we are going to operate the quad bike, we will have the bar on there and obviously provide helmets, which is PPE, but we will make sure that we physically fit that bar. We will make sure the PDO shafts are in place. We will make sure that the employees wear the seat belts on the side-by-side vehicle because they are an engineering device and they are hooked up to a secondary engineering device, which is a speed limiter hooked up to the motor. And so therefore, you've got to make sure that employees wear the seat belts. And so many times when I'm doing the walk around of the farm, I can see with X-ray vision 50 meters away, I'm looking at the angle of the seatbelt or even the one from the passenger side that's clipped into the driver's side seat. And it's a major problem with farmers bypassing the speed controls on the vehicle by clipping the seatbelts in behind themselves. No grey. Who is expected? Where does the legal expectation point to in terms of ensuring a safe workplace that you will ensure that everybody is using the seatbelts appropriately? The boss is no grey. And so that goes to your employees as well, that you have to make sure they use those things, those engineering controls. Beyond the engineering controls, administrative controls, the policy procedures, the toolbox meetings, the training instructions, signage, disciplinary action, all those things administrative in nature. And then the personal protective equipment, the gloves, the goggles, the hearing protection, the respirators. And the reason that personal protective equipment and admin controls are at the bottom of the hierarchy is because they're dependent upon people. If you eliminate, isolate, substitute, or engineer out the risks, hopefully you can do so to the extent you don't have to rely upon those lesser controls. And so, and in terms of knowing and assuring yourself that you provide a safe workplace, as I said, you should be thinking above that yellow line engineering controls, where you try to aim as much as possible that you know that your controls are at that level, rather than relying upon those lesser controls. To the specific chapters of the regulations that underpin the Act, and there are 13 chapters in the OH&S regulations. We don't need to worry about the mining chapter. We don't need to worry about what's referred to as the major hazards facilities chapter, which is major chemical plants and the like. We don't need to worry about the construction chapter, except that we're doing construction work, and that's a whole other piece of legislation relevant to the construction industry embedded within the regulations. And if you are ever going to take it upon yourselves to build your own sheds or undertake your own construction projects, make sure you get advice around the duties that apply to the construction industry. And I strongly recommend farmers engage specialist builders to do construction work. Don't take it upon yourselves, because there's an area fraught with significant legal risk. And so, there are specific legal duties that apply to construction. Now, it's important, though, that we focus on the regulations, the chapters of the regulations that predominantly apply to farmers and what we need to know. And the big one, the one that is clearly the biggest cause of deaths and serious injuries, is plant machinery, the plant regulations. And in the plant regulations, yes, farmers are expected to identify and control the risks associated with plant machinery in their workplace. And with that, our duty to identify and control, in terms of that legal duty to consult, it is specified that employers must consult with workers when identifying and controlling risks in their workplace. And so to all of these parts around the regulations, you definitely involve your employees in that process. So as part of your discussions and strategically putting plant on the agenda as part of your plan, and making sure, particularly around, for example, before harvest, pre-harvest, you go out with your employees and you'd ask that question. I want to be assured that I provide a safe workplace. That is my commitment to safety and to you. And on that basis, guys and girls, is every piece of machinery on my farm safe and fit for purpose? Are the guards in place? Are the switches working okay? Are the leads damaged or frayed? I want to know that every piece of equipment is safe. Not just the major pieces of farm machinery, the grinders, the bench, the drill presses, the bench grinder. You're not just looking at the big machinery, you're looking at the stuff in the workshop too. And you would do that in consultation with your employees. When you buy a new piece of farm machinery, depending on your color preference, blue, yellow, green, whichever color you like, the manufacturers who sell those forms of equipment to you will provide warranty periods. They'll provide service technicians who will come and travel and either bring the machinery to them or vice versa, they'll come to you. And in their systems, they'll maintain detailed service and maintenance records. And that's fine, because if an incident occurred, there would be a record of any sort of mechanical repairs that they've undertaken, such as hydraulics or hoses, brakes, etc., clutches, anything like that would be recorded in their systems. What worries us and what we know from experience is that there are a number of many farmers who, after those warranty periods expire, take it upon themselves to maintain and repair their own farm machinery and equipment. But what they don't do is they do not maintain records. And we strongly recommend the use of logbooks, even exercise books, where they would write down and record maintenance and repairs on machinery. So brakes, hydraulic hoses, clutches, things that are significant that might be mechanically have the potential to go wrong. And so really, really important, in the event of an accident incident occurring, that an employer has adequate records to demonstrate they do maintain and provide safe plant and equipment. A question has been asked by Elle, and Elle, I'll come back to that question a bit later. in respect to when the employees don't necessarily follow your instructions, or, for example, wear helmets. I'll save that one for later if I can. With plant, it's important to make sure it is fit for purpose and that it is safe. But also we know that things can go wrong, that you might have a piece of faulty equipment. And the analogy I use when I'm meeting with the farmer at the dining table is, I'm a miserable sod. I'm prone to the occasional day off work. I don't mind having a hit of golf on the golf course. Megan, our project manager, knows that's definitely untrue. She knows I work extremely hard. But on the odd time I have to have a hit around the golf course, one of the employees comes up and taps you on the shoulder and says, "Hey, boss, the problem with the tractor, the brakes are a bit slushy." Now, I reckon the next day, bright and refreshed, I've shot under par as I usually do, and my tan's improved. But nobody bothered to mention to me that the brakes are slushy. And what we recommend strongly is the use of lockout tags. Very cheap plastic tags you buy from safety suppliers that simply state "do not operate" or "equipment locked out." And they're readily available from safety suppliers. We don't endorse or have any affiliation with any safety suppliers. There's a number of them out there, but the one I always throw out there, just because they're huge and global, is Seton, Seton. And if you were to jump on their website, you'd order yourself a couple of lockout tags. And these potentially prevent the inadvertent use of unsafe plant machinery. They're also important to use if an employee is undertaking maintenance or repairs on a piece of machinery. They're around the motor and they need to make sure no one's switching it on. No one, puts the key in the ignition and starts the motor up, and then the bloke's getting his hand cut up because he's fiddling around under the bonnet. And so, yes, these are also appropriate to prevent the inadvertent use of machinery, not only when it's not serviceable, but also when it's under repair. And so, strongly recommend to farmers they should have some of these lockout tags, have them in the shed on a hook, maybe with the first aid kit in that sort of proximity, and make the employees aware of the location of the lockout tags. In terms of farming accidents and the biggest causes of fatalities, 1, 2, 3, I'll throw in number 4 into the mix. Tractors, number 1. This is across Australia. Quad bikes, number 2. Side-by-side vehicles, number 3. And cattle, number 4. With tractors, I strongly recommend to farmers, as part of their discussions with their employees, they should definitely train their employees on these things, but also should talk with their employees about tractor safety as part of having toolbox meeting discussions. When I ask farmers, why do they think people are dying on tractors? Well, we already know. They're falling off them, they're falling under them, they're getting off them while they're moving. Older makes and models that don't have interlocks in the seats that the operator can get out of the seat, they put them in crawl mode. They have rollovers, but there's a number of unsafe practices and also falls from heights in terms of losing footing and falling backwards. These are things that are worthwhile and definitely worth putting on the agenda with employees about tractor safety on the farm. Really, really important to engage with your workers about those things. With quad bikes, number 2, 50% of quad bike fatalities, the cause of death is asphyxiation from the weight of the bike landing on top of the person. And about 20% thereafter are head injuries and people not wearing the helmets. And Al, to your question, this is probably where I come back to that in a moment. Some farmers would say, when I throw the question of why are people dying on quad bikes, they'd say, well, speed. Yes, speed is a factor, no doubt about it, and definitely worth making sure that you have rules and expectations around movement of farm machinery and even speed signs, to limit the speed on the farm. There are very good software applications and devices that can be fitted to farm machinery to enable farmers to track the movement of machinery on their farm, including speeds. Again, on the side-by-side vehicles, the speed limiters, I'll come back to that in a moment. Yes, speed is definitely a factor. And the issue, it wasn't the speed that injured or hurt the person, it was a sudden stop and a big incident, a number of incidents involving head injuries, and the importance to make sure that people wear helmets on motorbikes and quad bikes. Now, to the question around the employee who refuses. Easy for us to say, but we have to say this, and we're not saying for the sake of it. The key to a successful business is twofold: a good name which you build by reputation and surround yourself with the right people. And if you have an employee who doesn't meet your safety expectations, who doesn't follow your rules, and doesn't follow your instructions to them, refuses to wear the helmet, and you allow that to occur, will you accept that risk? And if an incident occurs, you're knowingly putting yourself at risk and your business and your livelihood and that of your family by allowing people to work in an unsafe manner. And yes, you should take appropriate disciplinary action. Now, we are very much alive to obviously the severe labour shortages and challenges we have, but you've got to manage that risk. But to all the stuff we're talking about, the importance of engaging with your employees ahead of time, getting them involved, making sure that there are clear understandings of what your rules are, inducting them, having toolbox meetings, and making sure they know what your expectations are. And so as part of this discussion, yes, guys, when you ride the quad bike, yes, we have the bar fitted on the bike, and that will protect you if it rolls over and potentially, you're under the bike. But yes, that's the engineering control, but we still have to rely upon the use of helmets, and you will wear the helmets. And if you don't, disciplinary action will follow. So I hope that's addressed that question for you well. You would talk about all of these things in your toolbox meeting. And in this particular month, you would write down, spoke to the employees about plant and machinery safety, spoke to them about guarding, spoke to them about lockout tags, spoke to them about tractors and quad bikes and farm machinery on the farm, making sure that we provide a safe workplace by making sure all our equipment is safe and fit for purpose. And before you go, guys, I was talking to one of the young workers on Friday afternoon, and he reckons he's going away fishing with his friends on the weekend. And he's telling me he's going to have a cracker all weekend, going to sink an absolute barrel full. I was a bit concerned he might back here on Monday morning, still potentially unsteady on his feet. And if that had occurred, guys, here's our drug and alcohol policy. Should anyone ever come into our workplace in an unfit state, this is how we deal with it. The policies, procedure templates that we provide for farmers to be able to use are designed and intended for small business, mum and dad type farmers. We do see some farmers that have OH&S systems and platforms where they have templates in there, and they might instill in there or provided as part of a drug and alcohol policy, will undertake drug and alcohol testing. And those policies provide for random and full course testing. I stress again, you don't have a system on a shelf, but you make sure the policy procedures are fit for your business and fit for purpose, and suited to the needs of your business. And with drug and alcohol testing, we know it's somewhat impractical, particularly in regional Victoria. It's cost prohibitive. There aren't service providers available, and farmers aren't necessarily going to do random testing, nor would they do full course testing if an incident occurred. The key is to manage that person at that time, and to take a responsibility from a safety point of view. This is our farm. We are concerned for your safety and well-being. We're going to make arrangements to get you off the farm, and then deal with it the next day in the context of what's transpired the day before. But again, just echoing, make sure your systems are fit for purpose and suit your business. And so in your toolbox meeting notes, you'd write down all those things you spoke about and issue drug and alcohol policy. Another month goes by, and this goes back to the plan and guiding us through the journey of tackling issues bit by bit. And in terms of injuries and with WorkSafe, the biggest bulk of workers' compensation claims they receive are for sprain and strain type injuries, manual handling type injuries. And that's the term that applies the manual handling regulations. And again, the duty for employers to identify and control the manual handling risks in their workplace. Now, when we talk about manual handling and sprain and strain type injuries, WorkSafe will often look at it with two mindsets: slips, trips, and falls, and housekeeping. And if you perceive a clean work site, you perceive a safe work site. And when I'm walking around the farm doing the farm work, I'm obviously really enjoying walking to a farm where it's good, clean, tidy sheds and walkways, not tons of clutter and debris, trip and fall hazards. And older farmers, God bless them, somewhat notorious for being hoarders, and often have very untidy workplaces where sometimes you're thinking, well, I'm not even confident to walk in there. But if those things result in injuries, they're going to result in sprained knees, ankles, backs, shoulders from people falling over. And that's an area of focus with WorkSafe. But when we talk about manual handling, we are talking about the work that people perform and the need to identify and control those risks. And so with your commitment to safety and talking to your employees, okay, everyone, this month we're looking at manual handling here on the farm. Let's talk about how we make sure that you don't go home with a crooked neck, shoulder back. Let's make sure you don't go off the compo claim. So one of the joys for me coming into the industry and learning so much about farming, and particularly with the sheep farmers, to see that process of the docking of the tails off the lambs, and to sit back and watch that for 40 minutes or so, and to see the lambs being fed onto the carousel, and the next bloke then burning the tails off or docking them, and the third person then getting them off. And I was thinking as I watched that process, gee, that guy is putting lamb after lamb after lamb up from that carousel. He's going to be pretty crook at the end of the day. He's going to be pretty sore. And so it's not just about the weight of the object, it's about repetitive and sustained postures and movements. And yes, it does factor in heavy objects as well, but there is no prescribed weight limit in the legislation. It's about identifying and controlling the hazards and risks. And so you should talk with your employees about animal handling, and just dairy farmers and cattle farmers talking about handling of calves, talking about lambs, talk about fork attachments on machinery, talk about team lifting, talk about how you maneuver chemical drums and containers around the farm. And all of these things are positive, proactive discussions with your employees about manual handling. And at the end of that discussion then, all right, guys, it's around that time where we start to concern ourselves about sunburn and skin cancer and UV exposure. And here's our UV policy. And on our farm, it's sleeves down to the elbow. It's preferably broad-brimmed hats. And yes, we provide sunscreen. And make sure you look after yourselves, guys. Slip, slop, slap, and make sure you cover up, because we don't want to see anyone ending up with skin cancer. With things like drug and alcohol, UV, it's worthwhile considering looking at things like the skin charts from the Anti-Cancer Council, or literature around drug and alcohol, and assuring workers you can refer them to counselling support and supporting each other. Quit programs for smoking, for example. And so these things can be added to your toolbox meetings as you go through on that month-by-month journey to also throw into the mix. But get the employees involved, listen to them, let them talk about these issues as well. Another month goes by, and this month you're looking at chemical safety. And there are two parts of the law that relate to chemical safety. You have the Hazardous Substance Regulations and you have the Dangerous Goods Act. And WorkSafe, as part of their responsibilities, they administer both of those pieces of legislation. With hazardous substances, we're talking about things that are harmful to persons through inhalation, ingestion, or skin absorption. And with dangerous goods, we're talking about things that are harmful to persons, property, and environment. And those things are identifiable by the HESCAM diamonds you see all over the place on the containers, trucks, buildings, structures, and all over the place. Now, if WorkSafe were to enter your farm and chemical safety was their area of focus, they would ask you, do you have the safety data sheets for all those substances you have there in the workplace? And legally, the employer is required to have them available either in hard copy, in a folder, and or on a device where they can have them readily accessible. They have to be readily accessible to you and your employees. It's not sufficient if an accident were to occur to jump on the Google machine and then look up the SDS for the paraquat. No, the expectation is to be that you have those things and they are known to your employees and available to them beforehand. There are good platforms and software solutions out there that do enable employers to store and have a web-based depository for their safety data sheets. AgWorld is one that comes up prominently, has a pretty good resource for farmers to store their safety data sheets. Now, with the safety data sheets, the manufacturers are the ones with the legal responsibility to make them available, and often will do so via their websites. And so it's not the Bunnings store, it's not the hardware store or the farm machinery business in town. And it's not the label on the side, it's not the pair-off label or the little slip plastic bit in there. Those things are not necessarily the safety data sheets. It's the employer, the farm's responsibility to go and get them, and often it is via downloading off the website. Now let's say that, excuse me 1 second. Let's say that WorkSafe did come along and you did not have them. And a WorkSafe inspector would come in, they would see that you don't have them. They might say to you, well, look, that's a breach of the OH&S regulations. We're not going to fine you, we're not going to prosecute you, but we're going to issue you with an improvement notice. So they'll write that down in their inspection report, and then they'll give you an improvement notice, and they'll say to you, we'll come back in a few weeks' time, and when we get back, we'll expect you'll have them. You go and download them off the internet or put them on the tablet. The inspector comes back and he sees that you've got them and he says, terrific, I'll lift that notice. Now, it's not just for the ag products, note that. It's not. It also is for your oils, your degreasers, your worths, the stuff that's in the workshop as well. If those substances are used in the workplace, it's supposed to happen for them too. And as part of going and as part of your journey, at the start of that month, when you're looking at chemical safety, the first thing you do is run into the shed and do an audit, write up a list. And you'll find you might have 2 or 3 containers of product XYZ. You realize a couple of them are out of date or exposed or not no longer suitable, or you've got brand X that does that job and the other one does exactly the same job, and you're then culling and knocking down some of the chemical storages on the farm. Now, with the safety data sheets, the inspector gives you the notice, they come back and they see you've got them and they say, terrific, we'll lift that notice, you comply with that notice. They won't talk to you about what else you're supposed to do with the safety data sheets. They won't talk to you about manual handling. They won't talk to you about machinery and equipment. They won't talk to you about bullying. They won't talk to you about drugs or alcohol. Should something go wrong in any of those other areas, they will say to you, you ought to know those things. And you can't defend yourself on the basis of what an inspector visiting your farm did or did not tell you. It is a trap from my experience over many years. When I come across an employer and I'm talking about, would you think about having a farm visit? And they'd say, oh, look, mate, we've had WorkSafe out here and we're comfortable, our workplace is safe, we're compliant. That's because they may have copped the notice, they comply with the notice, and therefore they think that's it. But WorkSafe do not have the time or resource, and their inspectors are not there to do full-blown safety audits or to consult with employers about all of their legal duties and responsibilities. And if something were to go wrong and these matters are investigated, as I said, they would say you ought to know. Employers are expected to know what their legal responsibilities are. Now, to the safety data sheets, as I said, all good to have them, but more important to appreciate what they're for, and that is to ensure a safe workplace and to know that you are ensuring that the chemicals used on your farm are used in the right manner. And one thing we recommend as part of engaging with employees and putting OH&S on the agenda is at least once per year, teaching your employees how to read a safety data sheet. And when I'm talking with grain farmers, that's easy. It's paraquat every other day. If it's livestock farmers, sheep farmers, it's Gadare. If it's cattle farmers, it's injectables in the animals. And if it's hort farmers, it's the pesticides or the fertilizers they're spreading on the fruit crops. But sitting down with the employees, okay, here is the safety data sheet for paraquat. And if you get this stuff on your skin, guys, we know it's toxic. It will get into your bloodstream. If you breathe it in, it can cause severe respiratory disorders. It's toxic. It can kill you. Now, they might say, well, bugger that, mate. We'll never use that stuff ever again. Well, no, that's our job. This is a substance we have to use on the farm. But this is how we use it safely. So here's what the manufacturer says. Here's the safe operating instructions. Here's the personal protective equipment. You wear that respirator. You wear these gloves. You won't suffer any of those adverse health consequences. And what if something does go wrong? Here's the first aid procedures. Here's the spill containment. Here's the firefighting procedures. Here's how to store and handle those substances. And so even running through with a highlighter pen on one safety data sheet and then taking the employees through that at a toolbox meeting and providing training and instruction for employees around chemicals. And guys, here are our other safety data sheets. And so if you're ever concerned about any of the chemicals you use, and we want to make sure that they're used properly, this is where you find the safety data sheets, have a read or come and see us and we'll go through those together to make sure we're doing things properly on our farm. There are substances that are referred to as Schedule 7 substances used in the agricultural sector. I'm not going to go through all of them, but for those, people are required to have the ACUP certificate of the license, and that license is valid for 10 years. I do know that a lot of farmers, when I come across them, that they may have got that, like the high-risk work license, and the license has expired. And so you need to stay on top of that. And for those Schedule 7 substances, make sure that they are only handled by people who have the ACUP license. And those substances need to be kept under lock and key in the sheds. Now, apart from looking at making sure the substance is used properly, it's also making sure that they are stored properly on the farm. And when I go in and do the walk around of the farms, I'm looking at oxy cylinders and gas cylinders, MIG cylinders, and those things should never be freestanding, should always be chained up to a trolley or a wall. But then I look at the hoses and I'm looking to see if they're cracked or brittle. And I even cringe when I see sticky tape on the gas hoses. And I'm thinking, oh my God. Now with that, you've got a duty to provide safe storage and handling of dangerous goods, those things where you see the diamonds. And so with gas cylinders and canisters, they should always be chained up to a trolley or a wall. And gas providers, gas companies will often provide a crate, or you can get some chain and you can train them to the wall, but never freestanding on their own. And a lot of workshops I walk into, I see the odd gas cylinder standing on their own. With the aerosol cans, we don't store them 3 foot away from the bench grinder where there's an ignition source or electrical sources. With our chemicals in the shed, we put the poisons with the poisons. We put the corrosives with the corrosives. We put the toxics with the toxics. And so we segregate our chemical storages. With the IBCs, the intermediate bulk containers, the 1,000-litre containers, and I'm looking around and seeing those on the farm, almost universally for all safety data sheets, almost entirely for many of them, the first 3 words that feature on them is store, or for 4 words, store in cool, dry place. And so keeping them out of sunlight, a lot of substances and chemicals used on farms are adverse to sunlight and will react if they're out there for prolonged periods of time, and also will evaporate. Now, with the chemicals though, with the bulk containers, I sometimes see them stored in the machinery shed with the heavy farm machinery, the headers and the tractors and so on. And I do say to farmers and recommend to them they should have separate storage for their chemicals. And even if it is they segregate their shed by putting a bar down the middle and having that part as the chemical shed and having the other part as the machinery shed. And therefore minimizing the risk, because if anything's going to crack a 1,000-litre container open, it's going to be a piece of machinery backing into it or forcing into it. And so making sure you do provide adequate storage and handling of dangerous goods. Now, the other regulator that play in the space, apart from WorkSafe, is the EPA. And they do look at chemical storage, and we do look at empty containers and drums. And we do suggest to farms they should get some sheet fence, some Rio, and make sure they create a pen or a compound to store their empty containers. And they cringe when they see them blown around in paddocks. We do look at fuel storages on a farm, and we look at bulk storages. And WorkSafe inspectors have issued notices to farmers around having bollards and making sure there's adequate protections in place, again, to prevent the damage to the bulk storage containers. We do look at the old fuel stands, the ones that are on the raised up in the air. And what I see often with the fuel stands, there might be 1 or 2 or 3 of them, and I'm looking to see that they are properly labelled. And we're looking for placards. And so again, through Seaton or through a safety supplier, you go and jump on their website, and if you've got diesel tanks, there should be clearly a sticker, not a small one, and this is the problem with a lot of fuel tanks. The stickers need to be visible to the fireys when they come down the driveway. They want to know which one's the petrol stand and which one's the diesel stand. And having something that can give them a clear indication that that's the diesel tank is really important, that you've got a visual means that they know what they're looking at. And so making sure that there are clear labels, and also on the trolleys that you take out the trailers, it can be confusing as to whether it's petrol, diesel, or even water. Obviously, a lot of them look very similar. And so if it's a diesel cart, you've got clearly a label on there that makes it visible to anyone who needs to know and has concern that that is diesel in that tank. Now, the foreys often tend to know what's on farms and know what's available in there, but yeah, it's helpful if they can be helped by making sure we've got appropriate signage on the farm. Now, if you do stock more than 500 kilograms or litres of a particular class of dangerous good on the site, then you are required to have HazChem signage on the farm, and that should be visible on the shed or sheds, but also at the front of the driveway. Now, if you do exceed bulk quantities of fuel, there may also be required to have a manifest, which is a red folder that you keep in a box at the front of the property. And we have seen in recent months with farmers who have significant bulk storages of fuel, 20,000, 30,000 litre drums and the big double skin tanks, where they are requiring farmers to have dangerous goods manifests on the farm. And that requires preparation of detailed emergency plans for the farm and clearly identifying where the bulk storages are. And so these things are things that you might need advice on. And so if you need assistance, let us know. Now you talk to the employees about safety data sheets. You talk them through how to handle and store chemicals on your farm as part of a toolbox meeting. And an issue that's concern and frustration for a lot of employers in respect to quad bikes and helmets again, or face masks and respirators and gloves and goggles, or using power tools, is the use and wearing of personal protective equipment, PPE. And here is our policy, guys. And yes, we provide it for you. We have it present at the place where it's intended to be used. We've given you a set. There's no excuse, guys. Yes, if I come on the farm and I see you wearing your fashion accessory safety glasses on your head, not in front of your eyes, we're going to have words. But that's not what we're about. We're friends, we're family, we're small business. We don't want to see anyone hurt. So let's talk about it. Do we have enough? Have we got the right PPE? Do we need more? Where will we store it? And the respirators need to be kept in a box and well protected, as not keep them hygienic and not expose them to dust or substances. But I do go on farms. And an example just today, I was walking around with a farmer. He had a young 18-year-old worker there. And I'm standing where the bench grinder and the drill press are. Where the drill press and the bench grinder are, we do recommend a sign there, which I refer to as blue haired white glasses. And that's the one that says hearing protection and eye protection to be worn here. And that's probably the best and most prominent position to place that sign. But at the same time, I'm looking and I'm saying, do I see safety glasses? Do I see face masks or respirators or welding goggles? And I couldn't see any. And we shouted across to the 18-year-old and he said, oh yeah, there's some in the box over here. And he went to the box and there were none there. Or if I come on the farm and I'm going around and checking and I see them covered in dust and a clear indication, therefore, they're not used. But hang on a second, guys, this is about your safety and this is about us making sure we provide a safe workplace. So how do we make sure that we work together to support each other to make sure that we go home safely by wearing our personal protective equipment? And in your toolbox meeting notes, you'll have written down, spoke to the employees about chemical safety, taught them how to read a safety data sheet and issue PPE policy. I'm going to go through specific hazards, again, are captured in the regulations, and some notable ones: confined spaces. Confined spaces being places where people enter into on farms where there's a singular point of access, not just going into those spaces, then the risk of engulfment, fumes, drowning, toxic atmospheres, vapors, associated with doing the work in those spaces. Recently, and highlighted through our newsletter and in the press, an article about a 72-year-old farmer up in Queensland who became engulfed up pretty much up to his shoulders and up to his head. The weight of the grains pressing down upon him, he'd fallen into his grain silo. The police came along, put a ladder across the span of the silo, across the top of it, and had to pretty much dig him out with their bare hands and rescued him. And that is an example of a confined space, the risk of engulfment. But it could be going into a silo and cleaning it out with some solvents, or going into a vat where there's vapors, a depletion of oxygen in those spaces, and employers have to identify and control the risks of entry into confined spaces. The two dominant confined spaces in farming are dairy vats and grain silos. And when I do the walk around of the farm, I'm looking at the silos. I am definitely looking for confined space stickers near the hatch that clearly identifies that all of them are labelled as confined spaces. Now, with those stickers, like all forms of signage, they fade, they disappear, they become invisible. And I'm typically recommending to a farmer, if you're going to order some new stickers for your silos, order double the number of your silos. And that way, when they start to fade again in 6 months' time, you've got some more on hand that you can then replace those ones. But make sure that everyone knows about confined spaces. Now, with confined space entry prescribed in regulation, there must be a documented procedure around how the tasks are performed in entry into confined space. People need to be trained in confined space entry, and there needs to be a rescue procedure. That if someone goes into that space, they're not having to do what the police did on that occasion by climbing up on top of the silo and putting themselves at risk, that the person can be retrieved from that space without another person going in there. There is a famous story, well known in our industry, which is folklore, which happened about 10, 15 years ago, of a dairy farmer down in Gippsland who climbed down into a molasses vat. With molasses vapors, they are heavier than oxygen. He went down the ladder. As he went down the ladder, it was oxygen depletion. As he's going down, there's less breathable air. His son came along and he saw Dad lying on the bottom of the vat, and his son's gone down in there after him. And then Mum's come along, and thankfully she had the wisdom to not go down there herself, but she's called the fires, and thankfully they were able to cut the side of the silo open and get them out. But they did suffer very, very severe respiratory problems, and so lucky to survive. But you must manage, and as part of your legal responsibilities, provide a safe workplace that you identify and control the risks associated with confined space entry. Work at heights. We do have another instance involving falls from heights on farms throughout the course of the year. And occasionally some of those falls are from buildings and structures. With heights, a different hierarchy applying. Work from the ground if safe to do so. If we're not able to work from the ground, work from a solid surface. And that means, for example, providing handrails, edge protection, scaffolds, solid surfaces for people to work on. That can include use of elevated work platforms, booms, scissors. With some of those things, though, secondary fall protection needed, harnesses, nets, lanyards. Now, farmers sometimes also look at silos and will sometimes ask us, can we put people up on the silos using harnesses and nets and lanyards? People need to be trained in the use of those things. So it's not just adequate to just whack a harness and say, there you go, mate. People need to know how to fit them properly and also how to secure them. And there needs to be proper engineered and designed anchor points on whatever it is they're going to attach themselves to. And with some of those secondary fall arrest or fall prevention devices, they are fall arrest, that they're not going to stop the person hitting the ground. They may just suspend them or catch them. And therefore having rescue procedures in place that you can retrieve that person without putting them at further risk. Ladders are the least preferred means and the bottom of the hierarchy. With step ladders, if you're using step ladders to get on top of a shed or building, or if you're having to go and fix the TV aerial as I did on grand final day because I had poor TV reception, you're putting out the step ladder, you're extending it 900 mil above the access point. So someone can climb up there and step off comfortably to their left or right to get up onto the structure. With A-frame ladders, a number of falls from ladders on farms, particularly with cleaning and washing down farm machinery and cleaning off headers and tractors, replacing lights, making sure that you're providing ladders that are safe and fit for purpose and are the right height. And a preference towards platform ladders where people can't go above the second top rung. And if you're going to use A-frames, making sure that workers know how to use them safely by talking to them about ladder safety on the farm. Electrical safety. Yes, when I'm sitting with the farmer at the dining table, I'm asking that broad question, do you have proper residual current devices on the farm, RCDs? That you don't have the old fuse box type electrical wiring. I still see occasionally an older farmer or an older farm that has fuses, and I'm immediately recommending to them they need to call an electrician and upgrade their wiring on the farm to get residual current devices. That's been a clear state of knowledge for a long time now that RCDs are needed. With electrical testing and tagging, with WorkSafe, they tend to be very realistic about that. They're not necessarily going out and issuing multiple notices to farmers about test and tag, but there is an Australian standard for electrical testing and tagging in workplaces. And yes, WorkSafe can lead that as evidence in a court of law if there was an electrical incident. But to their credit, they're not necessarily going out and enforcing that rampantly on farms. With that, if we're not going to doing testing and tagging, it's really important we remain vigilant and we check and inspect electrical equipment and leads often as part of routine inspections on the farm. People can go and do testing and tagging courses. They can buy a test kit. Farmers can do it themselves or get a young worker to do it, but they have to be trained and be deemed competent and then have the right equipment to be able to do that. And most of that work is done by electricians. With power lines, the problem and the challenge we have with power lines is we do not own the asset. Obviously, the power companies do, but we definitely have to manage the risk and identify and control the risks associated with the risk of contact with overhead power lines and have regard for the thing commonly referred to as no-go zones. that we make sure that work is not done in proximity of the power lines. And so when we do silage, we put the silage over here, not underneath the power lines. When we bring the tipper in to take the grains off the farm, we are making sure that it does its work over there. If we're going to put the spray boom out in the paddock, we've got power lines near the gate. We make sure we keep those arms down and don't raise them up until we get past that point where the risk of power line contact is managed. And so keeping actively 6 meters away is looked at as the benchmark. Now, with power lines, the regulator of the power industry is Energy Safe Victoria. And if a farmer makes contact with overhead power lines, WorkSafe can get involved. It is a notifiable incident, but especially if someone is electrocuted. But also Energy Safe come in and look at it in terms of damage to the power lines. Now, Energy Safe Victoria make available free of charge that they'll send to farmers in the mail to large, approximately 1 meter high steel signs to say danger overhead power lines. And so if you haven't got yourself some of those, get onto Energy Safe Victoria, look up free farm safety signs on the internet, and they'll send them to you in the post. And they are worthwhile to have bolted to a post, not the post which is the power line post. You can't damage their assets, but put a post up or put it on a gate fence in line of sight where the power lines are in play. And that's a visual medium to at least create a awareness with the sign. We are talking with WorkSafe and the power companies about reflective devices on power lines with a view to trying to make them available and get them fitted onto power lines on farms. And we'll advise farmers, should that become available in the future. PowerCore in particular are certainly looking at making them available for farmers to be able to install them, but they will come at a price. But they are a pretty useful engineering control to create a greater degree of visibility, and particularly during sun and fog and when power lines sag, at least they provide a visual medium, an additional visual medium to help people know and be aware of the proximity of power lines. Fatigue and working alone. Grain farmers clearly are the ones that worry me the most in terms of work-related fatigue. Dairy farmers are incredible in terms of obviously long working hours with morning and afternoon milkings, but they become accustomed to their working hours and modes of operation. Not to say their work is not hard, and they do put in long, hard hours. But during harvest, when I hear about farmers who ask me about how long is too long in a day, or how many hours can people work, a farmer did ask me that question about a year or two ago and said to me, how many hours can I have my employees work legally? And I explained to them that OH&S law is performance-based legislation. It is not prescriptive, and you will not see it in the Act of Regulations. The maximum number of hours is X number of hours per week. But rest assured, if an accident occurred, and from an evidentiary point of view, if they had even a car crash driving home after long days or weeks or periods in the farm out in the paddocks, well, certainly all this stuff will come up from an evidentiary point of view. Now, with that, farmers need to manage the risks of work-related fatigue, and with harvest in particular, plan for harvest. So that farmer who asked me that question, and I asked him back, how many hours do they work in a day? And he said 14 hours, sometimes 16 hours in a day. And then I said, how many days in a row do they work? And he said 7. And I said, mate, you've answered your own question. But you need to think about giving them a day or two off, or, 4 on, 1 off, and then go hard for another 4 days. Making sure you provide adequate rest breaks, making sure you provide enough time for them to sleep and rest and recover. And so, yes, it is part of an employer's duty, a farmer's duty, to make sure they provide a safe workplace, making sure that workers aren't at risk of fatigue. Just only fatigue, the other regulator that is involved in our industry is the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator. And their pillars in terms of vehicle movement on roads are mass, dimension, roadworthiness, as in vehicle suitability for the roads, and also fitness for work. And in terms of fitness for work, they look at drugs and alcohol and also work-related fatigue and workers' hours on the road. And most notably, the transport company was prosecuted just recently, $2.2 million under National Heavy Vehicle Regulator law, sadly for the fatality involving the death of the 4 police officers on the Eastern Freeway, because they knew the driver had gone out under the influence of drugs, but also that he put in excessive hours on the road. And so it's not just WorkSafe you need to be aware of, it's also that regulator as well. With working alone, clearly by virtue of sheer geography and land mass, and the farmer I met today, 15,000 odd sheep, 8,000 hectares, 4 farm properties. And clearly we know that farm workers will at many times go and do fencing, go and do move animals, where there's a lot of time where they are in isolation. And farmers, as a huge worry for us, farmers themselves who are often working alone, inside machinery, on machinery, out in paddocks at night time. The expectation from employers in terms of providing a safe workplace, again, not prescribed in law, but performance-based legislation. To provide a safe workplace, we have to manage the risk of working alone, making sure we have appropriate means of contact, mobile phone communication if it's available, two-way locator beacons, CBs, radios, personal locator beacons, supervision, going out and making sure and checking in on people. The Emergency Plus app is a particularly good one for phones and GPS devices that can actually pinpoint a person's location. There are equipment that can be fitted to farm machinery that can, again, locate a piece of machinery and also tell you whether it's not moving. And so really important that we have means to identify where people are working and checking in on them as is necessary. Apart from identifying and controlling those risks, towards the end then I explained to the farmer they not only as part of that primary duty need to identify and control the risks, they also need to be able to demonstrate they maintain a safe workplace. Now, when I raise this suggestion with many farmers, many respond to me by saying, mate, we're on the farm all the time, and if we see a problem on our farm, we fix it straight away. And I suggest to them, look, that's all good and sounds proactive, but we recommend you ought to go around the farm from time to time with some sort of form of basic housekeeping inspection checklist. Now, if you did not have such a checklist, or you could download here's one we prepared earlier, a couple of pages where you just go through and check things from time to time. And when I do a walk around to the farm, as an example for that farmer today, for example, I'm saying, let's do this under the guise of a hypothetical walk, starting systematically, just working from the house outwards and just setting a pattern of things we're going to check. So we are going to check the fire extinguishers to see they're mounted properly. We are going to check the first aid kit to make sure it's up to date and in a presentable state. We are going to check the signage and make sure it's not faded or no longer visible. We're going to check the stickers on the silos. We're going to check the guards on the grinders. We're going to check the side-by-side vehicles and check the tires, check the seat belts, check the quad bike, check the tractors and the PDO shafts, check whatever. Now, if you had a toolbox meeting with your discussion with the employees, okay, guys, what do you reckon we'd look for if we did a regular walk around on our farm? And mate, you go and do the walk around this month, and other bloke, you do it this month, and young lady, you do it the month after that, and mum does it, and dad does it, and we share this amongst ourselves. Once a month to coincide with your monthly toolbox meeting, before that to go around and do the walk around inspection on the farm. Every once in a while, you pull out that register of injury book. There are no entries in here, guys. Well done. Keep up the good work. I'd love to think I provide a safe workplace, but here's the proof in the pudding. No one's getting hurt. But hang on a second, mate. Didn't you go to the local clinic last week with some muck in your eye or some stitches in your finger? Why did it go down here in the book? Remind you again, if it happens off-site, medical treatment or any sort of spray in Australia, it must go down here in the book. But before you go, guys and girls, I did the walk around this time. It's my turn. And I can see you standing at the bench grinder with your fashion accessory safety glasses. Or I can see the guards being removed. The example today with the bench grinder, that actually took away the tool rest. And the tool rest should be about 2 mil from the wheel, but they took it off completely. And so I knew fully well that they were allowing the employees to pretty much freehand it to hold whatever they're going to sharpen on the grinding wheel without any means of holding it in place. But check whatever. But with the employees, okay, guys, do you not appreciate why we do these things, why we have these toolbox meetings, why we have these policies, why we do these sorts of regular inspections? And again, I reiterate, if you involve them, you engage them, you get the culture where they really appreciate, but they understand, but they embrace what you're about because they know it's about their safety and they're a part of what you're doing. We're heading into the home straight, guys, and we'll go to questions soon. But this is where I pretty much wrap up. I'm going to talk about WorkSafe and how they function as a regulator. Firstly, they're not about prosecution, even though I mentioned they prosecute more than every other regulator. They are about safety and trying to make sure that workplaces are safe from day to day. About 5-6 years ago, there was a TV advertisement on a TV all around Victoria of an inspector rocking on the door of a factory. And the message was, if your workplace isn't safe, you're not either. The boss getting paranoid about the missing guard and then worrying about what WorkSafe are going to do to him. And that was designed to create the impression they're a tough regulator and somewhat to be feared. Now, those ads actually did a disservice to WorkSafe and their inspectors. And the vast majority of farmers that we've dealt with who've had WorkSafe on their farms actually say, well, that's not been our experience. They've been constructive, they've been helpful, they've guided us, they've talked to us about what we need to know, they've pointed us to the answers and solutions. Noting, as I said there, though, that that's not their job to advise on every issue and only deal with the issues they see at that time. You know, one inspector rock in one day and not see anything or not issue any notices. You could have another inspector with a different set of eyes, a fresh set of eyes, or see something differently, and they may issue notices. More importantly, you know what your responsibilities are and you're across those things. Now, in terms of making sure that workplaces are safe and using their enforcement tools and constructive compliance, they issue notices. So they'll always issue an entry report or an inspection report to detail the purpose of their visit and what they found. And if they see something they regard as a serious or immediate risk to safety, they issue what's called a prohibition notice. And that is, as the name infers, prohibit, as in stop that thing from being used or stop that activity. Their preferred mode of operation is to issue improvement notices. We see a problem or deficiency here, not to say we can't, you're not going to let you do it, but we want you to make it safer. And say, okay, with the cattle campaign, okay, you don't have the bottom rails enclosed to the animals, you don't have a access gate on the top or bottom. I'm not going to say you can't use your cattle ramp, but we'll come back maybe in 6 or 8 weeks' time. How long do you think you need? They'll even talk to you about, give you enough time, and they'll write that down in their report. And when they come back, they'll expect you'll address those things. Ignore a prohibition notice or fail to comply with an improvement notice by the times they specify, they will prosecute. They will refer those matters to their legal team for investigation and resulting in prosecution. A number of prosecutions throughout the year fail to comply with notices. Now, with the inspectors, if you're not happy with their notice, if you think they're being unreasonable or unrealistic or not give you enough time, they'll advise you of your rights to go to internal review. And that's a mechanism within WorkSafe where inspectors' decisions can be looked at, considered, and altered or adjusted. And the most common application for internal review is extensions of time. But internal review must be applied for within 14 days of getting a notice. But at least it is a mechanism that does work well and provides some accountability to their decisions. Now, WorkSafe inspectors love employers who can engage with them at their level, who can talk with a sense of confidence and assurance that they do understand their legal responsibilities and they do appreciate safety. The best way to manage safety in a business, which I'm going back to right at the start, is with a plan. To have a set of goals and objectives to tackle safety issues bit by bit, month by month by month. G'day, Mr. or Mrs. WorkSafe. How are you? Nice to see you. If you come on our farm, hopefully if you see something, it's something we've missed. But let's tell you what we do. We proactively go out and identify and control the risks on our farm. We proactively engage with and consult our employees about matters that affect their safety through toolbox meetings. We train and instruct our employees. We induct them. We train them on machinery and equipment through our training records. We do regular inspections on the farm with our housekeeping checklist. We're committed to providing a safe workplace. They hear this from the farmer who's showing clear commitment and intent. Their inclination is to say, terrific, we'll write that down in our inspection report. We'll leave you alone. We'll go and bother that other joker down the road who's not doing half what you're doing. The key is to be seen, to put a stake in the ground and have a crack and show commitment and intent towards complying with the law and providing a safe workplace. Is at this point that I would wrap up and summarise all of these things, and I phrase it this way. And it's the person who does identify themselves as being the director or the boss, be it corporate or the farmer who is the cleaner, exec, accountant, and everything else. That person, heaven forbid, something went wrong and they have to front up before a judge or magistrate. I'm sorry, all right, I never meant for that person to get hurt. That was absolutely never my intention. Well, yes, I can see how sorry and remorseful you are. I'll take that into account when I decide what to do with you. Did you try? Now, you would have WorkSafe leading evidence in terms of the incident. And I describe in particular with industrial manslaughter, although not yet necessarily tested in law, that there's a fair potential that they will look at everything else that comes into OH&S and what the business did or didn't do. And I describe that as the magnifying glass phenomenon. And even with incidents that occur generally, they will look at other things like training records, inductions, and that sort of stuff. So they will get their hands on those things. And so they may lead evidence to say effectively to the judge, well, look, Your Honour, here's a mongrel employee who didn't do anything to manage safety. And your lawyer then potentially having to jump to your defence, the OH&S lawyer, saying, well, hang on a second, Your Honour, you heard from Mr. High Gun Barrister there from WorkSafe, but have a look at these policy procedures that outline clear commitment and intent, particularly in regards to bullying, harassment, sexual harassment type matters, but in terms of that overall picture, a proactive employer who manages safety. And have a look at the evidence that shows they have clearly identified and controlled the hazards and risks on their farm and are proactive in managing those hazards and risks. And how they maintain a safe workplace through these workplace inspections, how they consult and involve their employees in health and safety through dialogue and toolbox meetings, how they train and instruct their employees through these training records, these induction records, how they make sure they provide for storage and handling of chemicals by having appropriate storage facilities. And all of these things I talk about are potentially the difference between the judge theoretically going, there you go, there's a slap on the wrist, as opposed to here comes a hoof up the bum. And I can assure you, I've dealt with numerous prosecutions that have held the hands of many employers where those who can acquit themselves best are those who can put evidence that shows and demonstrates clearly their efforts towards providing a safe workplace. And this is where all this stuff becomes important. And so I'm sitting at the dining table with you, I would then say, that is all the advice I have to give. And I'm now heading towards your computer to get out my USB stick and load it to your computer and transfer across all of the resources. Now, the handbook that I referred to, the 6-month plan, the policy procedure templates, the Toolbox Meeting template, they're all available on the Making Our Farm Safer website. I'm now opening the floor to questions.
Oh, hey, John.
Hey, Elle.
How you going? Thanks for the chat. It's very interesting. It is a bit overwhelming listening to everything that needs to be done.
Yep.
In terms of like the policies and things, once you get all those up and you try and do regular trainings, to be honest, that also will be difficult to get people to engage. Like, how does personal responsibility come in much? Because we often, you do all the best intentions and things like that, and then you still see, blatant disregard when they're not supervised. And they shouldn't need to be supervised.
But so great question, Elle, and that goes back to the black and white letter law, and that part of the act that provides an employer must provide adequate information, instruction, training, and supervision as is necessary. Now, it's not that you have to be omnipotent or be everywhere, and you can't be everywhere. But I stress probably the importance of that conversation, having that dialogue, having those recorded meetings, making sure you have trained the workers, and then supervising to the best of your ability. So you're right. Yes, there will be the worker who will blatantly do something or not, when unbeknownst to the boss or away from the boss. But when for example, they're not wearing, and I know a lot of farmers do this, they let the workers not wear the bikes, the helmets on the bikes. Or on motorcycles, quad bikes, and side-by-side vehicles. Just stick with that one quickly, side-by-side vehicles. Do you need to wear a helmet in your side-by-side vehicles? The answer is yes. If there's a manufacturer's decal on the dash, which there are many side-by-side vehicles, and or if it's in the user manual that specifies a helmet needs to be worn, then yes, helmets should be provided and worn on the side-by-side vehicles. But is inescapable, the employer duty to provide a safe workplace does include supervising and making sure they manage that risk. I had a group of farmers, approach VFF, as commodity groups do, with a policy proposal that we should go to government to try and put more legal emphasis or onus on workers. The manner in which the law is framed and has been around since 1985 and hasn't changed, it's not going to change. And it's embedded not just in Victoria, but in state and territory work health and safety laws in every state and territory is very similar. The duty of workers is to their own safety and to ensure that of others that are not affected by their actual emissions, and also to follow any instruction provided by the employer in terms of meeting their, providing a safe workplace. So they are and can be potentially held liable and responsible. And of the 130 odd prosecutions per year, there's probably 2 or 3 employee prosecutions, but they are typically for really serious omissions, like, for example, a bloke throwing towards an apprentice a circular saw while it's running, or doing something really graphically horrid, bullying type behaviour towards another employee, not the employee not wearing a helmet or not wearing their safety glasses. Now, note also, apart from OH&S and WorkSafe and criminal law, you've also got workers' compensation, and the work cover scheme is a no-fault scheme. And even if they don't do the right thing, they'll still be compensated too. But the emphasis with yourself, obviously, is to engage with them and provide a safe workplace. One thing I'll go back to that you said, Ello, and to the whole audience here, I know fully well that your head's hurting now. It's information overload. I know every time I sit at the dining table that you've taken so much information and detail, and then you're thinking, what do I do next? That's the value of the plan and the handbook, and putting a stake in the ground, not today, not now, but starting the journey. So, and I know with a lot of farmers, an example today, I actually know that respectfully, that the brains trust of the business often on farms is not the husband, it's the good lady wife. Do you need to employ or engage somebody to do all these things? Do you need to employ a full-time safety professional? Well, no, that's not possible. It's not practicable. It's knowing what it is you have to do, having the resources and putting a stake in the ground and starting the journey. And that's why we make available that plan and the handbook to guide people through what they need to do. What worries me and what I know is farms who buy resources and have what I refer to as that system on a shelf. And if an accident or incident occurs, I'm dealing with one, a fatality, where that is exactly what happened. And WorkSafe will get that. They'll get that folder that's empty and there's no consultation. They haven't probably applied it, and it gets them into trouble. So it's just having these, just trying to keep it simple and practical and achievable, but give yourself the time to comply. And with that 6-month plan, take 12 months. Take longer. I'm realistic about harvest. I'm realistic about shearing and the things we've got to do.
Thanks, John. Sorry, I missed, where do you get those resources?
They're all available on the Making Our Farm Safer website.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Yep. If I was meeting you on the farm, or if we did a farm visit, then, and if you ever, if we can find the means, sometimes I've been with many businesses, thousands and thousands of businesses over the last 20 years through various industries. With our project, 330 odd farm visits, about 200 of them myself. And I know that for the many farmers, they don't mind hearing it a second time, and sometimes even a third time. And so if we ever had the capacity, you get us out on farm, and then I'd also do the walk around of the sheds. And I'd say to you that probably the walk around of the sheds is probably the most critical part, the physical things that you need to be conscious of and aware of. But again, it's putting the stake in the ground and starting the journey. I point you again to the Making Our Farm Safer newsletter. It's been an incredibly important resource. I thank you again for your time this evening.